I'll go ahead and begin. Maya Perez is a writer and producer. Her work has appeared in Joyland, Electric Literature, The Master's Review, Misadventures Magazine, and more. She is co-editor of the books On Story, Screenwriters and Their Craft, and On Story, Screenwriters and the Filmmakers on Their Iconic Films, and On Story, The Golden Ages of Television, all from the University of Texas Press. Owen Egerton is the writer and director of 3 feature films, Follow, Bloodfest, and Mercy Black, which premiered on Netflix this past spring. As a screenwriter, Edgerton has written for Fox, Disney, and Warner Brothers, and HBO. He has written several novels, including The Book of Harold, The Illegitimate Son of God, and Hollow, which was named one of the best books of 2017 by NPR. Edgerton is one of the comics behind the Alamo Drafthouse Master Pancake Theater. So everyone, please join me in a virtual round of applause for our great panelists. Yay, yay, thank you for coming. But I know I just read you guys' bios, but I want to hear a little bit from you guys about what's been your journey as a writer or screenwriter to now. So give me a little bit of background. What brought you into screenwriting? We'll start with you, Maya.
Okay. So I often feel like the latest bloomer possible as a writer. I feel like a sort of like a dog on its mat who's been circling writing for decades until I could finally get comfortable enough to lie down in it. My writing career began as a reader. I learned to read really young and was just, truly a voracious reader, the kind of person who brings their books with them to slumber parties and so on, would read while walking, would read while driving. And I used to be a literary agent at William Morris Agency and then Trident Media Group, reading and editing manuscripts, pitching them to publishers. I've always loved championing other writers and trying to help them find homes and find partnerships. I moved from New York to Austin Film Festival, which is a screenwriters festival, and was the conference director there for about 10 years and really loved doing the same thing. I think what I liked about that, what I preferred about that to agenting was it was no longer about how marketable is this project and how much money can we get for it, but it was really more about how do I help make introductions for people and just enable their writing in general, and not having it be so, I guess, end-oriented. Then met my husband, we got married, we had a baby, we went traveling around Southeast Asia and India for a year, and finally, so far away and not working, I felt free enough to try writing. It was terrifying, but it also felt sort of anonymous, which was liberating. Came back, applied to grad school, got into the Michener Center, which was 3 of the best years of my life. I'm trying to now figure out if I can reapply in a different genre. And I've just been writing ever since. I write short stories, essays, and then I've also just sort of recently launched my screenwriting career, and I've got 2 features that are out on submission right now. So
awesome, cool. Owen, please tell me your journey.
Yeah, I'm not as talented as Maya, so mine's a little less. Michener, it rejected me, so. But I also used to bring books to slumber parties so I could trade them for cigarettes because I went to a nerdy community where we would do that. I was writing pretty early on, my journey into screenwriting basically is like I had one real job out of college. I went to the University of Texas, and I had one real job, and eventually I was trying to finish my first novel, and I realized that I had to work too many hours because I had to pay rent, and so I couldn't write as many hours as I wanted to. So I was like, well, if I don't have to pay rent, so I moved into this VW camper, with a pop top, and I mainly did this in Austin, where I'd swim at Barton Springs and shower there, and then I would abuse coffee shops with bottomless refills during the day, and then at night I'd do comedy gigs to kind of pay my way. And that's where I started getting writing. And then my first novel, I actually self-published my first novel. It's called Marshall Hollinger's Driving, and a small film company optioned it. And I started learning about screenwriting there. And at some point, I basically teamed up with some other guys, and this was back in like the 90s. People in Austin, they're still doing this, but you know, I guess I was younger at the time. I was like, people were doing all different things and inviting their friends to do it. So like one group was making movies, other people were putting on shows, other people were doing comedy things, people were bands, and you'd always help each other out. So I'd help these guys out with a movie that they had done. And eventually that movie sort of took off for them, and they had an agent and they had management. And so later on, when another friend and I had a script, we went to one of these guys and said, let me help you guys writing it. And we became a trio, Chris Moss and Russell Sharman, the three of us. And we kind of got lucky out of the gate. We sold something to Warner Brothers, and I kind of went on working with those guys, working in studio rewrites and stuff like that, while simultaneously writing novels at the same time. And then eventually I was like, I kind of wanted to do horror, and I didn't know if anyone would let me. And then that was kind of a weird voice in my head to be like, I don't know if anyone will let me. And I was like, wait a second. And kind of like Maya, I was like, well, why don't I just do it? Why don't I just be brave enough and do it? And so I started writing horror and directing horror. I also started in that, like, I also feel really late bloomer. Like I didn't direct a feature till well into my 40s. And yeah, that's basically what I'm doing. So I still write novels, and I still write screenplays and TV and stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, it's interesting hearing how you guys got your start and being interested in starting to write screenplays as well. And I know a lot of that journey starts with like a certain director or a certain like movie or TV show or some media that really spurs you saying, hey, I could do that. And I would like to know, guys, what was, do you have that thing for you? Was there a specific, is there someone specific show or a movie or a director or a writer that you guys personally found yourselves wanting to emulate that brought you into the field? Maya, would you like to start?
Yeah, there really is no one film or writer that brought me in. I feel like I've been ingesting stories forever. It's, you know what, and that was, I know this sounds really weird, but so, you know, I grew up in Kenya and on a farm outside of Nairobi, and the books that we had were limited. And so my mom would often make up stories, and we would also sing commercial jingles like the Firestone, you know, wherever wheels are turning. And like, even those like bring images to mind. So I feel like I've always been sort of like seeing stories. I love movies. One of my first jobs was working at Belvedere Videos in Baltimore. And one of the, awesome perks of the job was that we could take home 10 free rentals a night. And my mom and I would watch them all, every genre. So I don't know that I ever had that one work that introduced me to it. It's funny, the first things that I was writing were not in genre, but I do realize that some of the earlier books that had a huge impact on me were probably like Peter Straub's Floating Dragon, Stephen King's Cujo. It's stories that reflect the sort of inner turmoil of a young teenager or a young girl coming of age. It's one of the things, I don't know if you've seen Never Have I Ever yet, this new series. I mean, it's just
so good
to have John McEnroe narrating it. But the first time I ever saw a screenplay was when I was working at William Morris Agency. And I know most people say like, oh, screenplays are not meant to be read. They're just supposed to be a blueprint and, they're for making the movie. And I really enjoy reading screenplays. I find that it's like a really good script. You can see it. And it's almost as good as watching the movie because it's exciting because you're watching the pre-movie. And it makes you excited for the set designer, for the costume designer, for the actors, because when it's done really well, with just a few lines and gestures, you have this whole sense of what this character is and what's at stake for them. Like, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen to them? I was just rereading Damien Chazelle's Whiplash, and he just manages to like convey so quickly that it's like the worst thing that could happen to Andrew is to become his dad. You know, and you would just see in these tiny little things like what a loser his dad is in his eyes, you know. So yeah, I would say that. I would say just it really, again, it wasn't until like my mid-20s that I was even reading, that I even really saw a screenplay and thought, oh, this is what this form looks like. And it's really exciting because everything is like right to the point.
Yeah, I love it because like I remember the first moment I looked at a screenplay and it's just like I saw the secret world behind everything, and it's just it was so magical. Owen, I'm getting distracted by the side of the conversation, but I do want to hear if you had that intro, that what thing brought you in.
I did actually. I did. By the way, Maya, I love hearing you talk about film. And it's just great. I love how you started out with, I've always been able to see stories. I'm like, oh, that's a great way of putting it, seeing stories. For me, I think like in literature, it was discovering Kurt Vonnegut. So I was like in college actually. And I was working at like a city, like after school summer camp. I guess it was during the summers, a summer camp that was run by the city parks. And I remember like the kids were all taking a nap and I was like exhausted and I was sitting among them. They're all like on the mats sitting around me. And they have like their selection of books, which are like, you know, Mr. Worm goes to Wormtown and, you know, the giant caterpillar or whatever it is. And then there was God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. It should not have been there in any way, should not have been this book, which describes pubic hair quite graphically, but it was there. And I was like, what is this? And I knew the name. I'm like, yeah, I've heard of him. And I started reading. And I was like, oh my God. And I already had wanted to be a writer. I was already writing, but I was like, I just didn't realize you were allowed to write this way. I didn't know that was allowed. Yeah. And that was huge for me. And then in screenwriting, it was similar to what Maya said of like going to the video store. I used to love, like there's a video store in a little hometown and just reading the backs of every horror movie, just like looking at the pictures. And then for me, I think Halloween 4, it's weird to say, but Halloween 4 is a huge impact. It's like, I want to make movies like that. I want to do that kind of stuff. That's just too cool. So I think those would be the the two big influences, Vonnegut and Halloween 4.
Wait, so I have a question for Owen, and that is when you wrote your first screenplay, did you know about screenwriting softwares then?
So funny enough, like before I wrote my first screenplay, I was just sort of learning about it. A friend of mine who's a director, he was working on this sitcom that he ended up filming. He's like, I'm going to film my own pilot with Tony Hale in it and everything like that. And he said, I want you and this other friend to write it with me. I says, it's mine, but I want you to be funny for me. And I was like, oh, I can do that. And he goes, and I'm going to buy Final Draft because you have to have this thing. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, I'm buying Final Draft for you. And so, yeah, I used that Final Draft until Final Draft was eventually like, we can't even update that anymore. It's like a flip phone. That's that version of Final Draft.
Oh, man. I want to talk back about looking at an actual screenplay, though, because it is so much different than watching a final movie because of just the sheer efficiency in writing. And I think that's just one of the many things you can learn about looking at a screenplay. But I don't know. I believe fully in like interdisciplinary action, like how learning this whole different medium completely affects the way you approach other mediums. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to hear about some of the lessons you've learned about, entering into screenplay and how that's affected your writing as a whole, and how your, prose writing has affected your screenplay and your screenplay has affected your prose.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I would say just to start, for me, when I'm writing a short story or a novel, I enjoy being lost in a big way. I will have some idea, but especially in a short story, I just like being lost in the feelings and just find whatever's happening. In a screenplay, I know where I'm going. Structure is always important, and it always is saying something. Structure says something. But in screenwriting, structure is even more so important. We have an understanding, and I say we, not as just writers, but as viewers, an understanding of what structure is. So I am constantly thinking through structure as I approach the screenwriting. And a screenplay is always, it's not what anyone's thinking. It's not what anyone is smelling. It's only what is heard and seen. That is all you're describing, is what is heard and seen. Where in a novel, I love going into someone's head and spending a chapter where all I'm going is through their memories of their parents and this and that. And I love that. But in a screenplay, I have to go like, how do I express everything that's going on inside of a human being in what is seen and what is heard on the screen? And also do it efficiently, because every page of a screenplay is money. So like an extra 5 pages is thousands of dollars. And that's a remarkable thing. And it'll be reason enough for someone to even reject a screenplay. They'll be like, I would have said yes to this screenplay if it was 100 pages, but it's 120. So I'm not going to even look at it. So those are just some of the things that have influenced me. And going back, like, it's sort of now when I'm writing a new novel, I start to think more about 3-act structure. I start to allow that. And I hopefully, I try and bring some of the stuff that I love about novel writing into what I'm writing when I'm writing for film, and even more so, I think, when I'm writing for TV. There's a lot of sort of novel writing sensibility that helps me, I think, when I'm writing for TV. But hopefully, they're going to start to cross-pollinate more. I would hope they would.
Yeah, echoing what Owen just said, making a movie is really expensive. It also involves a lot of other people, so they need to know what they're doing in this scene. Why am I doing this scene? And, as you know from watching bad movies, when like 1 minute on the screen is a really long time. And it seems like it's not going to be when you're writing the script, but it's excruciating when you're sitting in a seat watching this and you're like, oh my God, like, that's when I'm like grateful for like streaming, because I'm just like, I can fast forward till something happens. I don't want to watch, hands on top of wheat. I want. Like,
that's my next movie. It's Hands on Top of Wheat comes out next weekend.
I know, it's like, get to the sex scene in space. That's what we're here for. That was the promise of the premise. But what I agree with Owen also with that. What I love about writing short stories, and I think it's interesting that we're both, you selected for this panel, writers who write in different mediums. And I write usually a short story or a new draft in between each draft of a script. One, it's a fantastic palate cleanser, and it makes me feel like I've been away from my script for much longer than I have. But I also miss and love that freedom of having no idea where it's going to go. And I still have my method for screenwriting so far. I would love to find and reach a shorter method, but every time it's like, I start with my log line. I write a treatment, I revise the treatment, I revise the treatment, write the outline, revise the outline, revise the outline, and then write the screenplay. And what that also allows me to do, one, every time I'm revising, I'm crystallizing who is this character and what is the story about and what's actually happening here. And then what's really nice about once you get to the screenplay is, at least for me, I don't need to write it in order. If, on this day, this is the scene that I really want to write, I can jump ahead because I know where that's going to appear. I will say how I think that they have helped each other is going back to what I just said before. It's like, what is this about? And I do feel like that's important regardless of the format. I think even for a short story, and not that it has to have that sort of mission statement, but for me, it's more about like, it can be about like, this is about unreliable memories. this is about loss. You know, it doesn't have to be so specifically, you know, about a man who seeks revenge after these gangsters kill his dog and steal his car. It's like, no, it doesn't, but I still need to know what it's about. And I think that you sense that whenever you're reading, you know, any piece of work.
Yes. And I love that. I love that both y'all's answers came at the question a lot differently than I was expecting, actually, because y'all took these big picture ideas into both your writing, and you didn't give like the simple answers like, oh, it makes your dialogue snappier. It makes you
make your
details.
dialogue snappier.
The cinematic prose, you know. I love this idea of, you know, just knowing what it's about, and
you know, it's also, I mean, that's such a good point. It's also discovering what it's about. I mean, like, that's one of the things when I'm novel writing. Sometimes novel writing, I can just go and just lean into what I don't know, and then somewhere along the way, sometimes after a draft, I'm like, oh, I thought it was about it's actually, you know, it's about my relationship with my dad again. How about that? Or whatever it is, you know, it's like those kind of surprises. And that's why, like, as Maya was saying, those treatments and thinking about it, like, you have a cool idea. A penguin who can talk, it writes itself. But then you start to like play with it and think about it and think about it and think about it, and you discover what it's about. And that's really rewarding. And I agree with Maya. It makes a huge difference in a screenplay. If you can feel it. You can feel it in every page if the author knows what it's about.
I also think that I remember like the first few screenplays that I wrote, I would get really frustrated about each new draft because I was trying to think like, I was really almost more tweaking, making little changes, but not really doing a rewrite. And I feel like to do a real rewrite, it is to take those long walks, go to museums, read books, read scripts, and every time look at it anew, thinking, who is this person? And what questions do they have? What do they not know about themselves yet? And I think just to try and look, it's all, you know, it's like when you're playing Scrabble and you have to shift the board a little bit so that you can see the letters in a new way. I feel like that's what a rewrite is. It's just really every time making this more real.
Yeah. I guess it's the whole thing of like, it's revision means to vision again.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. I got another bit of a whopper of a question, I feel like, because writing for screen and, you know, writing, say, a novel are two different beasts in terms of your relationship to the final project. And I know that both you come from different experiences in production as well as just writing for screen. And I'd like to hear what y'all's like your visions on like how, as a writer versus as a director, as a producer, and how the different, like say you're not the director or the producer of your own product, how that affects the final product, how that affects the relationship, you know, you as the writer have with the final product. That's a bit of a thinker and a bit of a confusing question, I realize.
No, it's a really good question. You know, there's an interesting, there's sort of the writing, you know, there's the writing that we do with the closed door, like the draft that no one sees, where you can put out crazy ideas, offensive ideas, and you put them onto the page, and then you never have to show anybody. You're like, oh gosh, okay, I learned, or whatever, and you move it all around. And then, of course, it's what you're sending out, this document. And with a novel, in some ways, you're like, okay, this is the novel. This is what I want someone to read. The experience will be reading this. And that is the that's the final product that I'm trying to put out there in that way. And then with a screenplay is, as Maya was putting out, it's like it's inviting all these other people. This is like the blueprint idea is kind of there. Like it is a work of art in itself, but it's a work of art which is guiding us to make something bigger. And in that way, it has to kind of go up these steps. I mean, I suppose a book does too with, who's going to read it and are they going to publish it and all this. But like in the same way that like Maya was talking about, like starting with that log line, if you don't have like a log line, and for those of you guys who don't know, a log line is basically the one sentence description of your story. A man battles a killer shark off the coast of Cape Cod, whatever the one, like an alien gets left behind and befriends a young boy in the suburbs of California. Boom. Something that is sort of like, okay, that's the basic idea. Because if you don't have that, then no one's going to read that screenplay. And I'm thinking when I'm writing that screenplay, before I send it to anyone, if it's not really grabbing people, like really extraordinary, if it's not like fantastic, they won't get 10 pages in. They've got 10 other screenplays in the hot tub next to them in Southern California, waiting to be read. They're just still, I think a lot about like, how can I move this? How can I have it feel exciting? How can I not go, just wait. It's a slow burn. Wait, by page 90, it really gets going. How do I just sort of like put things in that are really wow and extraordinary? So I think a lot about that. And then I do sort of think about also like, okay, where am I, as Maya was saying, giving opportunities? Like, is an actor reads this and goes, oh, I want this role because this character has a life and I feel it. A director goes, oh, I see the potential for complex storytelling here. And even folks like who are just producers go, you know what, that's something I haven't seen before and I want to see that movie. So I think those are the things that strike me as I'm writing, thinking about who's going to be seeing it next.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also that, with a book or a short story or poetry, it's a collaboration that's just solely between you, the writer, and the reader. Like they're the other collaborator in this production. And then with a film, it can change in so many different ways. And it can either be like the best high school team project, where people just come in and elevate it and they read your lines in a way that was never how you were reading it aloud to yourself, but it's so much better. And suddenly this other character is like, wait a minute, is this their story? Like it is in this scene. And that's really exciting. Or you can also have like, what did I see on Twitter? It's like the worst team project in the world, which is like obviously Project Wear a Mask in the States. So I think that's, you're really, it can be kind of, I think at least for like, maybe more for independent film, just really exciting and dangerous to work on a movie and to see, what all these elements are going to bring, and some you can control and some you can't. And then, you'll be affected by budget, you'll be affected by weather, by locations, and then you have to fly by the seat of your pants and quickly rewrite something. And if you are the kind of person who enjoys that, this is a great thing to be doing. If the thought of that makes you feel sick and want to curl up in a corner, I would stick with prose.
That's just such a great, succinct way to say that. I just had flashbacks in my brain just of different projects I've been on.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
You're like, never again. And I feel like that happens every time. It's like every time you're like, oh my God, never again, never again.
Never again.
You're like, okay, let's have another baby.
Oh my God. We're going to move to breakout rooms in just a moment. However, I'd like to ask one quick question from each of y'all. Let's recommend a screenplay to everyone. What's a screenplay that you think is really good to just sit down and be able to read?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I really, so one of my, I have so many favorite scripts, so many favorite movies and writers. Scott Frank is one of my favorite writers, hands down. And I love reading and rereading Minority Report. It is a movie that I remember really enjoyed in the theaters, but I was almost so distracted by the gloss and the effects and, the effects also of the star power of it, But then you read the script and you realize, oh, this movie started a lot earlier than I thought it did. What I thought was the inciting incident is so much later. And I just don't know the last time I read a script that made me just feel like I just got let in on a secret.
Yeah.
So I would for sure say read Minority Report.
Oh, that's good. I would say, first of all, read a bunch of screenplays. Just read a bunch of them. Good ones and bad ones. Bad ones teach us so much. Or like for movies that you think are kind of okay, it's just like because anytime you get a moment, you're like, oh, if they had done that, you've learned something about screenplays. Like, oh, this would make it better.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you've learned something fantastic there. Maybe you can even go write that screenplay. This is what it should have been. But if I had to recommend one, I just got finished reading Get Out. So Jordan Peele's film, and they actually published his screenplay, and it's really cool. It's annotated with stuff and from Jordan Peele's own sort of talking about it. It's really beautiful. And it's a weird, like structure-wise, they break it into 4 acts, which is kind of strange. But I don't think it's Jordan Peele's structure. That's not how he did it. But anyway, this one was really great. And you can kind of like, oh, I see what he was doing the whole time. And it's like Maya said, like, nothing's just in there. Every minute has a reason, a purpose. Every line is doing something. And if there's a scene that didn't work, even if it was great and it's in here and like, cool scene, didn't work in the edit, and they cut it out. They cut it out of there. And even that is great to see, like what got cut from the film that you finally saw. So that would be one I'd recommend.
Yeah, and it just, off of what Owen was saying about reading screenplays, I mean, so I teach screenwriting at UT, and something I tell my students the beginning of every semester throughout, if you read a screenplay, at least 2 to 3 screenplays a week. I mean, and I really feel like that should be the minimum, 2 to 3 a week. Good and bad doesn't matter.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and they do go by quickly, and I feel like read scripts from movies that you've already seen, read scripts from movies that you haven't yet seen. There is no way you will not be a better writer 1 year from today if you do this. There's just no way. Through osmosis, through learning, oh, that's how to do the scene where, let's just say you wanted to have a contained thriller. Like, let me read Locke again. Let me read Buried again. Or I want to have, some of this takes place in the past, some takes place in the future. This is a dream sequence. How do I write that? It's like, well, think of all the movies that have had that. Go back, read those scripts. They're just, it really is, I've seen in some of the other panels, people talk about like, well, what books do you recommend? And I feel like, there are books out there, they're fine. The best thing you can do is read a script. There is no better book.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. And then you also start noticing, like, as Maya was talking about, like the inciting incident and those type of things, you start sort of noticing those things like, oh, because it doesn't say in a script act 1 or act 2. It doesn't, unless it's a TV script. It doesn't say inciting incident or whatever. But you start going, oh, bam, bam. And you start noticing when them happen. Then you're going to start watching movies, and you'll start watching movies with the timer on and go, oh, minute 11, that's already happened. Like, 24 minutes in, look what's going on. And yeah, you just start feeling it. You start feeling those beats and what people are doing right and what people are doing wrong.
Yeah, and just like read the first 10 pages and you're like, what do I already know? What do I already know about this person and this world? And how do I know this? How did this writer convey this so that I now know that this is, again, because I just reread it again, Whiplash. The opening scene is the drumsticks and Andrew, playing the drums. That's in close up, and he's, arm muscles are like well developed. It's like everything is showing you this is his whole life. Same thing for Molly and Booksmart. Like that's how we open. She's got like her like crazy retainer in, and she's listening to her motivational tapes and her like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Michelle Obama posters. And so we know it's like, she's a nerd, but she's not a nerd we've ever seen before. She's an aggressive, hyper, violent, like, I'm going to get mine nerd, which is, you're excited page 1.
Yeah. And notice what she just said too, in all those circumstances, it's not dialogue. I think so many people think that
Right.
Screenwriting is dialogue. both big moments that she's describing is not a character going, "Oh, hi, honey. Who are you?" "Well, I'm motivated by greed." "Oh, okay." Yeah. It's what we're seeing, and it's like Maya said, how we see stories. The other thing I mentioned, Get Out. I would say read any Pixar script.
Oh yeah.
Pixar, except maybe Cars 2. But Pixar scripts are just brilliant at doing structure and doing everything that Maya was saying of like, oh my gosh, I'm 10 pages in and I get it. And I love this character. And often, again, I mean, the first 10 minutes of Up, you're weeping. You're going to follow this person across the world, even though he's the grumpiest character you'll ever meet, because we've fallen in love with him in 10 minutes of an animated story. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, it's just like, it's like a symphony. Like all the little beats just start lining up. There's like a perfect rhythm that good movies just fall into. Hi, welcome back, everyone. Just before we go, I want to say thanks so much for attending this panel. Thank you so much to our authors. Their books are for sale through our official partner, Book People. There should be a link in the program, but they have put together a special little page with all of our authors' books. Please support them. Please support Book People. And everyone, thank you so much for coming. I hope to see you throughout the rest of the weekend. Bye, everyone.